now shifting gears. From history and revolution, we are moving inward, into the quiet corners of the human heart. Welcome back to the Bhopal Literature Festival, presented by the Society for Culture and Environment, powered by Dainik Bhaskar. Our next session touches on the universal human experiences, the need for connection, and the reality of isolation. The session is titled Writings About Intimacy and Loneliness. In a world that is hyperconnected, why do we feel more alone than ever? And how does literature capture the delicate silence between the two people? Or the echoing silence within one? This session explores the brave act of writing about the things we often leave unsaid, our vulnerabilities, our desires, our solitude. To take us into this sensitive territory, we have a writer whose work is as sharp as it is poignant. Please welcome Ms. Shiny Anthony on stage with a huge round of applause. And to navigate this conversation, we have a moderator who brings both academic rigor and a deep love for literature, Professor Dr. Roli Agarwal. Please give a huge round of applause for both of our guests. I would like to take the distinct honor to introduce our guest today. Shiny Ji is a powerful voice in the contemporary fiction. She has written acclaimed novels including The Girl Who Couldn't Love, Can't, and Eden Abandoned, the Story of Lilith, which won the Wise Owl Prize for the Fiction in 2025 and also the Ladli Prize for Fiction this year. She's also a master curator, having compiled anthologies like Hell Hath No Fury, Boo, and Why We Don't Talk. Her ability to capture raw human condition was recognized early on when her story, A Dog's Death, won the Commonwealth Short Story Asia Prize in 2002. A warm round of applause for her. And Professor Dr. Roli Agarwal brings over 18 years of teaching experience and currently heads the Jagran School of Languages and Social Sciences at Jagran Lake City University, Bhopal. A graduate of St. Stephen's College, she completed her teaching training course, CELTA, from the University of Cambridge and has taught English to immigrants in London. Her doctoral thesis centered on the existential analysis of Arthur Miller's plays, making her an expert on the themes of existence and human struggle. Her research interests include gender issues and bibliotherapy, the healing power of books, which is the perfect topic for today. True brilliant minds discussing the spaces between us. Shiny ma'am and Roli ma'am, the stage is all yours.
Thank you so much for such lovely introductions. Welcome everybody to this session at the Bhopal Literature and Art Festival 2026. Our session is going to be around writings about intimacy and loneliness. And often these two concepts are considered to be polar opposites. But literature, gives us this ample proof that instead of being completely different from each other, intimacy and loneliness often feed into each other, a lot of times intimate experiences are nevertheless lonely, and loneliness can often lead us to a very candid encounter with ourselves. So I'm very, very thrilled and excited here to be in conversation with Shiny Anthony today about her phenomenal book, Eden Abandoned, and we will explore issues around intimacy and loneliness through our conversation. Before I start with my questions, I would request you to please tell us something about Eden Abandoned so that we have an overview of the story.
Thank you, Roli, and this is my first time in Bhopal. I can't tell you how thrilled I am. It's like, I think, a national secret because it's like such a lovely gem of a place and tucked away somewhere. So to come here and discover Bhopal firsthand for the first time, it has been a wonderful and exquisite experience for me.
Thank you.
And to hear so much of, local dialect Hindi, because my first tongue is Hindi. I was brought up in Delhi. So to hear so much of Hindi around me, it really feels like having come back home in some way.
Wow, lovely.
So, Eden Abandoned came to me for two reasons. One is that I belong to what is called a minority religion, and unlike other minority religions, this particular minority religion is completely under the radar. We can say what we want, we can do what we want because nobody is watching us. Nobody is making us feel unwelcome. I have to say that. But I don't know how welcome I am because I belong to a religion which probably which has been imported, which has been hugged or embraced by where I come from, but the fact remains that it actually is a foreign religion. When we think about, we know that we have places in India which are religious sites because certain gods have been born there, brought up there, they belong to there. But when it comes to Jesus Christ, then it's Bethlehem and Gethsemane and Jerusalem and so many of those places which are not easily geographically accessible to us. So I think I was, first of all, very, very curious about what is this religion of mine which has come from outside, but it's actually from inside because so many of the Christians, the Catholic Christian community in Kerala are so rooted to Kerala, to India. So how do we bridge that, And all the histories and the mythologies connected to the Christian religion come from abroad. They are not really written by people here because we know that we are so far away from it, not ideologically or conceptually, but geographically. The location itself is so far. So that was one way of looking at what the religion or the community that I was born into, and just to explore the mythology and the stories around it in a way that also keeps the fact that I'm an Indian right at the forefront of it. The second thing that I felt, and that is more related to the topic that we have today about intimacy and loneliness, is that I feel all of us at some point in life, we go through a time when we are completely betrayed. We feel there's no one standing with us. It could be our sexual orientation, it could be our profession. Maybe we want to be an artist, and maybe your family cannot understand how are you going to earn your bread and butter, what are you going to eat. So the questions that they ask may come from the correct places, but they're not the questions you want to hear. And you have the answers, but you don't know how to express it. And that point in time when you feel your parents, your family, your neighbors, your kith and kin, your children, your best friends, your mentors, and everybody has turned their face away from you, and you are all alone in this world. I think that's the moment when you start to think, who am I? Why am I here? And a lot of our creative journey kind of begins from there. Because see, I'm sure I'm not alone when I say this, that all of us, we didn't ask to be born. We don't know why are we here, in what mystical, for what mystical reason, what mystical creator or maker has placed us here in this spot, and what are we supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? So first of all, I want to mark my territory on this planet, because I don't know where I came from. I don't know what belongs to me. I don't know who I am. So these few inches where I stand, this is my earth. My 2 feet are standing on that many inches of earth, and that belongs to me.
So, Shiny, what is the myth of Lilith? Because, when I was looking it up, I found a lot of texts where, they categorically deny that any such character ever existed. So, could you tell us something about that?
So, first of all, when we come to the bad women, quote unquote, the bad women of mythology, they all have certain things in common, and that's because they're written by men. So, since men also had to place these examples of perfect virtue of women for the other women to follow, they wouldn't want you to go the wrong way. So all the stories about women that come to us are written by men. And therefore, they are cameos. Even the virtuous women have very little to do. So, what would you say about women of vice? So, I think in Lilith's case, she is there in, there's a brief mention of her in the Old Testament. There is some mention of her in Jewish mythology and lore. She is there, she's a white witch's mother in CS, the Narnia series. And she's there, Gilgamesh's epic. So she is there in many ways, and her face or her name or her brutality or why she became a woman, a demoness, is all there somewhere. But it's all, you know, it's like twinkling because it's not like clearly coming out as a story. But in the 19th century, the Jewish women who wanted to feel liberated, they unearthed her from history and they gave her more of an identity. And then they started a feminist magazine called Lilith. So it was for Lilith. And one of the earliest short stories has Lilith and Eve actually befriending each other, and Lilith climbing over the wall of Eden to rescue Eve. And they both climb it back. So that's one of the earliest short stories in the 19th century.
Lovely. So, you know, Lilith's story, from whatever bits of it have been told, have always been told about her and not really by her. So, when you decided to give voice to Lilith's story, was it an act of empathy or was it an act of rebellion for you as a writer?
I think when we want to write about a person in a way that to understand her best, we use the first person. But whether we, as a writer, whether we use the first person or the third person, we are giving her a personality which is completely her own. So for me to have discovered her and written about her, I did have to, of course, you know, I think all writers, whatever characters they write, some part of it is them. But for me, Lilith was like, you know, to tell you the truth, it will sound like mystical, but I used to write this novel only in the night. Yeah, I could never write it during the day. Day, of course, I would read it and I would improve or edit it. But in the night, you know, it would feel like I'm being possessed. And, you know, this voice would come of Lilith's. And the next day, whole day, I would have a migraine because I've not slept properly in the night. And I would literally say, like, you know, aaj raat maaf kar dena, aaj mat aana, because I just want to have a good sleep. But that very forceful nature that she was talking in, I don't know where that demarcation came, that it was she or me. And what you asked is correct, because at some points I was thinking, should I make it a third person?
Okay.
Because first person is putting so much of, you know, me also coming, and I wasn't sure whether a little bit of it was me. Okay. So yeah, so but as a writer, yes, I wanted that consciously not to be like more me than necessary.
Right. Talking of technique, you start from chapter 13 and then end on chapter 0. Why this backward movement?
So when you meet Lilith in the book, you know, she is fully, how do I say, Lilithized, you know. So she's basically going back into the past and thinking of a time when she was just this young woman in love, or God had just freshly created her. And why did she become a shape shifter? And why did she choose this path of darkness and black magic and the black arts? You know, the word black it's a very racist word because that's supposed to be evil. But and then she owns it. She's like, okay, if you think I'm evil and I'm dabbling in the dark arts, fine, I'll do that, you know. And I don't know if how many of you all know this, but the word Lilith, lullaby, comes from Lilith.
From Lilith.
Yeah, so she's supposed to be the patron demoness of SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. When babies used to die, caught death or mysteriously, then they would say Lilith has taken them. Because Lilith's babies were killed, and then therefore Lilith was always taking babies. Yes. So lullaby just means Lilith goodbye. Lilith bye.
Yeah. in continuation with technique, you've also written short stories and novellas. How do you surf between the various formats and, how do you kind of multitask between all these genres?
Actually, it's very strange because I only see short stories. Yeah. So even if somebody talks to you and tells you an anecdote of their life or from something that happened to them, it is actually a complete story. You might know them before and after, and you know that you can connect the context and everything. But what they tell you can be independently repeated to someone. So I see short stories everywhere. So even when you read like something like Kite Runner, I'm sure a lot of people have read Kite Runner. The first part is so much like literary fiction. It's like these children growing up in Kabul. Then the second part is all about existential angst and modernism and American living. And the third part is like any Bollywood masala, who done it. So they are actually three separate short stories to me. And a lot of P.D. James novels also have towards the end like a summing up of an emotion that was like the motive for the murder. So I do see short stories everywhere. So I would describe myself primarily as a short story writer. The three novellas that I wrote, The Girl Who Couldn't Love, Can't, and now this Eden Abandoned, which Rolly and I are talking about, are actually short stories that ran away, with with themselves. Like they just didn't give me a choice. They became like really long short stories. In fact, The Girl Who Couldn't Love, I gave it to Preeti Gill, my agent, and she said that I said she was putting together a book on murder stories, and I said, "Thoda lamba ho gaya, isko aap kaat lena." And she said, "But why? When it's long, just write some more, and then it becomes a novel." And then I was scared because making it a novel, it's like a gun to your head. You don't know how to do that. So I said, okay, maybe I'll make it slightly longer. So all these three novellas are like 25,000 to 30,000 words. They're very, very short. So they're basically long short stories.
Right. Let's come back to Lilith. By revisiting a biblical figure, you enter the space of religion, morality, and control. So, for you as a writer, how restrictive was this entire procedure, and did you end up discovering newer ways of emotional loneliness for women when dealing with characters that have been a part of mythology?
Recently I went to a lit fest, Ubud Lit Fest, and there was a book club meeting where people were asking questions and we were talking. And one lady said to me, when I was reading your book, what stayed with me is the sadness that Lilith feels when she has to give up domestic bliss, quote unquote domestic bliss. I don't know if it exists, but she says that. So I thought about it and I thought, really, yes, because if that feeling was not genuine, then the whole story would not have been written. If she always wanted to betray Adam, if she never really felt anything strongly for Adam, then she would not have been Lilith. She is Lilith because she loved Adam from the core of her heart. She was living for him. She was made for him. He was just as he was made for her. So for her to walk out on him, that is a wound that actually is the beginning of a new Lilith.
Right, that's wonderful. A lot of times, in fact, Lilith made me wonder that this emotional loneliness for women, is it ancestral? Does it come down from days of yore? And, is it somehow ingrained in our collective cultural memory? And do you think literature can actually disrupt this pattern and rewrite it for all women?
I feel that men are equally lonely because they are also trapped in whatever they are trapped in. And unfortunately, the planet itself has become a very predator-prey situation. And obviously, if you have the upper hand, because I'm talking as a woman, if I, as a gender, had the upper hand, why wouldn't I run with it too? So I don't think anything is anybody's fault. But men are equally lonely, but they don't have the emotional alphabets. They don't have the language to express it. Women are smarter, and women are able to put it into words, into the right words. And they just want to say that this is what I want to make our relationship complete, to make myself keep more complete. But I think men don't have that privilege. So, and now, because in this post COVID world, a lot of workshops, corporate workshops, focus on empathy training for men because women never lacked communication skills. We were always encouraged from childhood over, how to, we were trained in so many ways how to sit, how to laugh silently, and how to be when people are around, how to not give away family secrets, how to keep everything inside, and how to just keep sacrificing and sacrificing and sacrificing. And we have become very obsessed with that. This was my lot, this is traumatic, I don't want to do this. But if you look at the other gender, then they're suffering equally because that's also a tableau. They're also frozen in that role of being provider or whatever it is that they think, and that mainly do not cry, do not make a noise about. So women that way have been emancipated emotionally insofar as that we were never told to not share secrets. We always had our girl gang. We could tell our mother, maybe our mother gave us the wrong advice, but we would go and tell our mother, I don't want to marry this guy, I actually like that guy. And she'd be like, he has no salary, please think twice. But we could always spell it out. And I think men were doomed to not be able to spell it out. There's a line in Lilith, in one of the chapters, where she says, if Adam loved himself, then he could have loved me.
Yeah.
It's because as a man, he can't love himself. He doesn't know how to love himself. He cannot love another person.
Yeah. He's always more concerned about maintaining the status quo and
The image.
Yeah, he's more worried about that. The way you describe Lilith's loneliness and the turmoil that she goes through feels very, very strikingly modern also in your narrative. So what do you think are the similarities between what Lilith experienced and what generally women experience in an urban context, say today?
Actually, I don't know if it's a pitfall. When we write about characters from the past, like Lilith and everyone, what I feel is that we put modern feelings to them. I don't know how they felt at that time. Maybe they were very accepting of it all. And in fact, there was one history anthropological study which said that it's not true that cave women were sitting at home and bringing up the cave babies and the cave men were going out and doing all the hunting. Apparently, it was the other way around. So we don't know. We really don't know.
Right. Your work also suggests that autonomy always comes at a cost, So, and loneliness is perhaps the cost of emotional independence, especially for women. Why do you think this is? And is this cost ever negotiable?
No. I think if you want a rebirth or a resurrection, you want to come back as the person you think you want to come back as, the person you really are. I think you need to take out a lot of these unconscious negativity that you gather because this is what so-and-so wants and this is what so-and-so wants. This is what is expected of me. This is what I should appear like. I think unless you shed all of that, like peel yourself like a banana, you are not an edible fruit. You have to come out of all those expectations and do exactly what you want to do. And that is very, very painful. It's easier said than done because to actually stand up to your closest people who have probably done everything for you and to tell them, I'm so sorry you made me do engineering and you spent all your savings on getting me married to the right guy, but both these things just don't suit me. It's very, very painful to do that. So you have to be very sure that that is what it is. And if that is what it is, and that if you are a man and you want to live with a man, or if you are a woman and you always wanted to only write poetry and you never want to enter a kitchen again and make kadi chawal, I mean, that should be left to you. And it will be very, very difficult to stand up and say, I will not make idli sambar ever again. So it is painful. But whatever that level of it is, without that rebellion, Nothing is easy. Nothing is easy. But once you do that, it's like the universe kind of really opens up its doors and gates and everything. You will not believe how the universe will meet you more than halfway after that. The universe just wants you to take that very tough, shitty step. And then the universe is with you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Lilith's dispute with Adam actually starts from the point where she starts insisting that she wants to be on the top. Now, that is female desire, which is stated very, very openly and without apology. But you know, even today, Shiny, female desire, which is again expressed very openly, is looked at as very, very unfeminine and transgressive. So, how do you think this particular moment from the book sheds more light on the intertwining relationship between power, desire, and gender? And also, do you think Lilith was punished more for having a desire or for not wanting to camouflage it at all?
I think both, definitely both. I think that in all mythologies across the world, I would say that how do you say that a woman is bad? So she's first and foremost loose. She's like a tooth in somebody's mouth. She's loose. You know, a loose tooth in your mouth. She's loose, a loose tooth in the universe's mouth. And the second thing is that she's not a good mother. So these two things, that she is someone who is a prey to her own desires, and two, that she is not maternal. I think these are the only two things that a man can accuse a woman of, to say that she's not a good woman. And that's why Lilith kind of owns it. And she's like, yes, I'm not your so-called good woman. I can't do these things. Now what?
Live with it. Right. There's another very powerful moment in the novel, you know, where Lilith realizes that in order to make one man not special, she will have to make many men special.
That is just Lilith giving you an excuse because she wants to sleep around.
So, how do you think, this hints towards the constant emotional labor that women are always, expected to perform? And for Lilith herself, do you think this is a moment of empowerment, or is it just another exhausted choice that, hell with it?
Okay, that's interesting, because I feel a woman does not have to be polygamous or go out and find herself numerous lovers if that's not what she wants. Because I remember at one time when I was growing up, all the films about liberated women showed them with a cigarette in their hand and a glass of some alcoholic drink in the other hand. Since I neither drank nor smoked, I felt, my God, am I getting it wrong? Am I supposed to do these things because I have to show everyone that I am liberated, I am independent? So yeah, I think that Lilith also went through the motions of being all that, but she was wanting to be her own person at the end of it.
Right. Thanks so much. May I invite you to read some excerpt for us from your novel, please?
Okay, I'll first read from a short story that I've written some time back, and I hope I'll remember it right. Once upon a time, there was no time, no once. Just he and me, a good man, a bad woman. Naked and curious, just dying to know. But first, there was the serpent and a fruit. Apple, I think. I'll just keep it ready in case I forget. I'm Eve, the world's first woman, fresh off the boat, chromosome XX. And Adam, too busy tracking water, rubbing stones for fire. And then one day I died. I became a ghost, a female ghost. Breasts, smoke rings, uterus, water vapor. I was just hanging around when I saw a man bash a woman up with her own baby. I moved close. I moved closer. I breathed in, she breathed out. I raised my hand, up came hers. She, me, we hit him hard. No one sees me, they see only the meek woman with years of nodding behind her. On moonless nights, I paste words on girl tongues, fighting words. But enough about me, we ghosts have work to do. Hey there, open your gob. Let me coat your sweet little tongue with dissent. Come, my beautiful descendant, we have a no to say.
I absolutely love it. Would you like to do one from Eden Abandoned as well, please?
What was the matter with me? This has been asked by demigods and jinns alike. And they ask me this with the confidence of not having anything the matter with them. The world belongs to them good men, bad men, every man, all men. And slightly behind them, their smiles stiff, stand the good women. Goodness is a cage the good never rattle. Bad women are not even a part of the ecosystem. They are at the outskirts, never to be spoken of. Tarts and temptresses, trumpets and sirens, concubines, the women who occupy a no man's land, quite literally. Cold run eyes and smudged lipstick, gin on their breath. Women without men, that's a leper colony. Moses only parted water, man parts women. On one side of him stand the moral women, and on the other, the immoral ones, shameless, unclothed, unwashed ringlets, loose on their clavicles. If you don't have a husband, you are every man's wife.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Refusal also is a pretty lonely act. Refusal in itself, you know. So, do you think literature has enough space to accommodate all these women who say no? And what do you think readers would want? Would they want to, you know, kind of read more about women who endure or women who do not?
It depends on what the reader's gender is, I think. I would say, you know, a lot of real estate, like let's say just take something like property rights, it's very difficult for women to get them, you know. So just like I was talking about territory, it's not like anything is handed to you on a platter. So it's whether it's real estate, whether it's your right to laugh loudly, or whether it's your right to get angry. I think I've said this before, but you know, an angry man is considered very sexy. He's very attractive because look, he's losing his temper because he's trying to be protective and all macho, and he may be good in bed because he's so angry all the time. But an angry woman is considered an oxymoron. You know, so so you know, for a woman, a proposal can come like this guy is like a CEO and he's like so aggressive, and you should see him in the boardroom. He's like this and he's like that, and his bank balance is this. But no proposal comes the other way that, you know, you should meet this woman, she loses her temper 24/7. There's no proposal like that. Yeah. I mean, let's not go into that because what are male hormones, you know? So I think anger is one thing that we need to own. And what is an angry woman called? She's called a fishwife. She's called hysterical. It's that time of your month, or you're completely menopaused, and now you're under like the radar. You don't even need to be looked. You know how when you're young and you enter a lift, you don't look up because the person, Uncle G, standing opposite is just staring at you. But then one day you enter the lift and nobody stares at you. You're invisible because you've gone past that shelf life that a man is going to be according you with. So I think to reclaim the anger, what we need to do is get very articulate with our anger and not fly the fists like that's what men do. We have to fly the words. And an angry woman who's articulate is a complete work of art.
Beautiful. So, as a writer, do you think loneliness is a punishment imposed by society or just a byproduct of choosing freedom?
No, that is their gaslighting. When they kind of push you away and they say if you don't do or live like this, then you are not worthy of living with me. That is, and you know, I'm not saying it's only men who do this, and when we talk about patriarchy and we tend to put a whole lot of men we don't like into it, it's also the women. Patriarchy's biggest and fastest running vehicle, the petrol, everything is women. So there is a whole system out there that we have to change it from the inside. And now I am so happy that the young students that we meet, I teach, she teaches much more than me, but I take one semester somewhere. None of them see marriage as some kind of an end goal. And I'm very happy. And I love the word partner. Whether they're legally married, they're not married, people say he's my partner, she's my partner. They've taken the gender thing out of it. Fus bana diya us word ko. He is my husband. My husband said this. You know, no, please don't